All right. So today you're going to be taking notes on fats, and then when you're done, there's an assignment in Google Classroom with fats and acid reading. So to kick this off, we're learning about the different major molecules in that make up food. We talked about carbohydrates. We'll talk about proteins another time. Um, so today we're going to talk about fats, and I want to think about what before we get going. Make sure you have the note sheet in front of you, and I think at the top you'll see that it says to uh, kind of jot an idea down about what you already know about fats, um, or at least let's brainstorm briefly. So these are some of the things that students have talked about in the past, right? That we might have healthy ones and unhealthy ones. We know that oils are probably related to fats, right? We burn fat for energy, and there are different types of fats. And we talked about fats in the soap making unit. So I'm hoping that you remember some aspects of it. Okay. So let's get to the bulk of the notes here. Remember that you can pause this video at any point to make sure you get caught up. I'm going to move sort of fast through here, so I'm expecting you to pause and jot down the notes into the right spots. And I will check that you've filled this in during our next class. All right. So fats are composed of three main elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And you can just write the symbols. Okay. Very similar to carbohydrates, but we're going to talk about how they differ. Okay. They differ from carbohydrates in that the fats contain a lower percentage of oxygen and a higher amount of hydrogen. Okay. And another term that is often thrown around for fats is lipids. Um, so if you hear lipids, think fats. Just like carbohydrates, there's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay. We what did you? We didn't do this calorimeter lab, so you can skip that part. Can you quantify how much energy there is uh, per gram of fat? So we know that we burn them for fat. Okay. So fats, 1 gram of fat contains about 9 calories. Okay. And 1 gram of carbohydrates in comparison contains about 4 calories. So we know that fats have more energy in them than carbohydrates, which makes sense. We store extra energy in our body as fats. And if we consume a diet high in fat, we're consuming large amounts of energy. Okay, so if I wanted to figure out how many calories that is, I could take the number of grams of fat, which is 4.5, by the number of calories, which is 9 calories per gram of fat, and I get 40.5 calories from fats. And I can do the same for carbohydrates: 9 grams of carbohydrates times 4 calories, 36, for a total of 76.5 calories for this random food that I found today. Okay. Fats and lipid molecules are generally not soluble in water, meaning they don't dissolve, and we call that insoluble, right? And that makes sense, right? If we imagine oil, which is a fat, mixing with water, they separate out from one another. Um, One thing that fats do several things in the body. All right, and we're going to label as these three things. They store energy. All right, we also use them to build the cell membrane. And lastly, in some situations, they actually become hormones. All right, we just finished our unit on brain chemistry. All right, let's flip the page and talk about the different types of fats. Okay, all fats are composed of several parts, and part one is the same no matter what. All right, so part one, hopefully this term makes sense and is ringing a bell, is glycerol. It's a 3 carbon molecule. We talked about it in the soap making. All right, that's the 3 carbon backbone. And then the next part are called fatty acids. All right, and they differ where the R here, right, the R attaches to this chain of carbons and hydrogens, and the chain differs, and the R is indicative of like differences between them. Okay, when carbon and hydrogen, when a hydrocarbon with a carboxylic acid combine, they form this structure. Okay, and this middle part here changes. Okay, so we've got this chain of carbons up top where the R changes, and this is what it looks like when it's together, right? And this is what we know as a fatty acid. Okay, and they come in a whole bunch of different types. All right, so let's flip the page. The first type we're going to talk about is saturated. Okay, saturated look like this, meaning they're saturated in hydrogen. Okay, meaning every single carbon, with the exception of the ones with the oxygen over here in red, are bonded to the maximum number of other things they can, meaning all four bonds are single bonds. Okay. These things are generally solid at room temperature, like think bacon fat, butter, the fat you see in ground beef, coconut oil, palm oil from our shea butter. All of those things are solid at room temperature. They were the ones we added to the soap first because they have higher melting points. Okay, and these are saturated fats. And while they are delicious, right, they are associated with plaque buildup in arteries. So here's some foods that are high in saturated fats. And when you get enough of those fats, they can start to kind of build up on one another. Okay. And what can ultimately happen is they can cause a blockage in your arteries, and this can lead to heart attacks or strokes, among other things. Okay. So diets high in saturated fats have a risk of having heart attacks and strokes. All right, the next type of hydrocarbons, type 2 here, are unsaturated, and there's kind of two types of those. And they're, meaning they're unsaturated hydrogens. There's two types. The one type, first type is called monounsaturated, meaning there's one double bond. Mono meaning one double bond within that fatty acid chain. Okay, these things are found in whole milk. That should be milk, not mild. Whole milk, nuts, some red meats, fatty acids, avocados, olives are all things that are high in monounsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated, poly meaning many, okay, these things have more than one double bond in their chain, okay, and these are some foods that they're found in: nuts, seeds, some oils, some fish, and several other foods like soybeans, whole grain wheat, peanut butter, and seaweed. Okay, so two types of unsaturated fats. We have mono, one bond, and poly, meaning multiple double bonds. Okay, flip the page one last time. Mine is moving real fast. You can always go back and watch part of this again. Okay, when I combine those two parts, okay, I take my glycerol and my fatty acid chains, and I get that triglyceride. Okay, and depending on what type of fatty acid chain it is, right, I got a saturated one, I've got two saturated ones because they're nice and straight, and I have an unsaturated one with this double bond here. Okay, call that triglyceride. I'm hoping this rings a bell from um, the soap unit. We made the models of those, and then we took that and showed how they interact with lye. I'm not going to do the lye part today because we're just talking about fats. Okay, so there's a couple other terms that I want you to be aware of when it comes to fats. Okay, the first one are called partially hydrogenated oils. You'll see these as ingredients um, in in foods. Okay, and what is done chemically. Okay, it's a process that adds hydrogen atoms to some of the double bonds, creating single bonds, making the fat more saturated. Okay, this is what happens in margarine, puddings, and shortenings. Okay, so margarine's a plant-based product. It's really easy to grow something like corn that produces a fair amount of unsaturated fatty acids, but I can shoot hydrogens at that oil, and I can actually trick some of those carbons to breaking their double bond and adding single bonds. Okay, creating this product that behaves like a saturated fat. Okay, and for all intents and purposes, your body thinks of it as a saturated fat. It's just a cheaper way than growing a cow, milking it, turning that into butter. I could just grow some corn and shoot some hydrogens at it, and that's why margarine is generally cheaper than butter, but it's a partially hydrogenated oil. The other thing that we can do that you might hear of are called trans fats. They're becoming more banned around the country and internationally. But what they do is this occurs during the processing of polyunsaturated fats in food productions. They are polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats that are chemically altered to change their shape. So typically, a unsaturated fat will have this kind of kink in it as the bond angles change. It'll kind of bend around, and that when I have a whole bunch of those molecules that are all bent around together, they can't stack up very well on one another. So they flow past one another. Thinking of like olive oil or corn oil or veggie oil. Those are higher in unsaturated fats. They flow past one another more. Okay. But I can actually alter the that bond, and I can actually kind of flip it around the location of the hydrogen, causing it to be nice and straight. And when that occurs, those straight molecules can stack up on one another, similar to what happens with those saturated fats. They stack up on one another, therefore they're more solid, and we get them at solid at room temperature, like butter or bacon fat, right? Trans fats are generally really bad for you. They lower your good cholesterols and raise your bad cholesterols, and these are foods that are high in fatty acids, trans fats. So just be kind of aware of those. What I need you to do now is transition to the on fats and acids reading. Um, you'll find that in your cubby. Please complete that. The reading is attached to Google Classroom, but here it is. You can pause the video along the way. Okay. And that sort of wraps up the video portion of this lesson. Thanks so much.